I think we've been talking about a lot of people's landscapes, but I'm going to take you through something about an animal that we see very commonly in and around us. This is a photograph of a Japanese Akita breed called Hachiko. Anybody who's seen the movie Hachi will know that it's an epitome of loyalty, where the dog actually waited for its master for 9 years after its death. And in general, when we look at dogs, we always think of them as, the awe factor. But what if we start seeing them in ecological spaces, and then we see a whole network of interactions? So with that, I would like to talk about what I did as a part of my PhD research. Many of you may have grooved to this song, but I use it in a very different perspective here. So if you have any idea about what the global population of dog is, let me just put it across for you. We have a 1 billion global population of dogs. So in general, anthropogenic subsidies, when it comes to anthropogenic subsidies, dogs have been one of the biggest beneficiaries of it. And at a scale of India, we are looking at a population which is almost close to 60 million. Irrespective of whether the dogs, whatever is their degree of association with people, in general, when they are in the wild, they interact as predators, as prey, as disease vectors, and also compete with other animals. So this is just a graphic of what essentially I did as a part of my PhD. And I worked at two scales largely. So the first part is at the scale of India, where I looked at the impacts of dogs on native wildlife. And at the scale of the Upper Spiti landscape, which is a trans-Himalayan landscape in Himachal Pradesh, I was looking at an entirely ecological space where we were looking at populations across space and time, what were the role in terms of disease transmissions as predators to livestock, looking at human attitudes and impacts of agropastoralism. So obviously it's a lot of work, but I would want to focus this talk on these two aspects of my thesis. So if we look at what does the global data set say when it comes to dogs impacting wildlife or even livestock? So in a paper by Doherty mentioned that almost at a global scale, some 188 species were threatened by dogs, and they also contributed to 11 extinctions. In terms of livestock damage, it's also a huge amount of money. India is also a center for invasive alien species, for threatened vertebrates, and in general, there has always been very scant ecological information about what kind of roles dogs play in such kind of landscapes. So what we intended to do through this study, we started what we call as a targeted online survey. This was done between September 2014 to April 2016. We had 683 respondents, and we chose these respondents and send these surveys out to them. And at the same time, in the same timeline, we also did a print media search. And in the online survey, we were trying to understand, although we looked at respondent information, what we were also trying to do was to take details of dog attacks and what people felt about dogs in general. Out of that 683 people, 249 people responded to our survey, and we recorded 403 independent attacks from this online survey and 57 attacks from print media, giving us a total of 460 independent attacks across 381 locations. And this is what the map of India looks like when it comes to dog attacks all across. And whether we like it or not, they are pervasive in every space within India, especially when it comes to their impacts on wildlife. Now, we reported almost close to 80 species that were being targeted by dogs, of which 31 were IUCN threatened. And if we want to understand, majority the attacks were caused, the mammals were involved in these attacks, where the family of the ungulates and carnivores were the ones which were largely targeted. But we also observed dogs attacking birds and reptiles as well. So this is a kind of a graphical denoting all the species that the dogs attack. nearly 50%, 57% of these attacks were led by packs, and almost half of them led to the death of these species as well. And most people observed that around 68% of these were free-ranging, they were unaccompanied by people, and many of them, at least half of them, were reported from PA and buffers. This is just an image from the WI NTCA camera trap data of 2014, which essentially shows all these camera trap images of dogs inside national parks and the buffer areas. When we ask people about the perception of dog problem, although majority of them kind of mentioned that it was harmful, they also said that about 35% kind of mentioned that there could be an increase in the predation events of dogs on wild animals in India, but most of them felt that they really don't know what has happened. In terms of dog population control, majority of them felt that yes, dog populations need to be controlled, and about 40% resorted to single control measures, but about 60% of them opted for a combination of methods. So coming to something to wrap up from the first part, dogs are a very important human-mediated source of mortality, and wherever you see very high dog densities, there are going to be very high predation risks. They could also be considered as a large-scale edge effect as the effects move from the peripheries to the core. And the impacts in such kind of landscape is as similar as that of invasive species, and therefore an urgent attention is required for sensitive species like the Great Indian Bustard. So if you look at this image over here, it's basically a dog running after a Great Indian Bustard, and there are just 150 left in the Indian subcontinent. This was the first part of what I spoke about, but as I mentioned, dogs are also very important predators of livestock. And I take you to the Upper Spiti landscape in Himachal Pradesh, which is in the rain shadow of the Pir Panjal range. The altitude ranges between 3,000 to 6,200 meters. And if you look at the community, they are largely agropastoral. They grow a single cash crop in the summer. And there is also a community system of herding. So they have a set of large livestock, which comprises of yak and horses, and they are left free in the pastures, whereas the small-bodied livestock like the sheep, goat, and the medium-bodied livestock like donkey and cow, zomo and cow, they are mostly grazed on a daily basis. What the landscape also saw was an enormous change in the mid-1980s, where green pea was introduced as an important cash crop. So just to understand how the landscape changed in these so many years, so between 1996 and 2009, there was an increase in the proportion of area that was covered by green pea that increased from 36 to 51%. Along with that, there was the climate also started warming, and there were a lot of apple orchards that started coming up in these places, mostly towards the southern part of the landscape. So economically, the landscape was changing really, really fast. What also happened was tourism opened up. There were policies that were made which made these places accessible, and therefore there were a lot of restaurants that came up, and therefore the dogs. And all the population grew in the last almost 2 to 3 decades, probably because of the lack of waste management or whatever it is. But this is what is being seen. There are very high dog populations. The human population densities are very low, dog populations are very high, so that's quite a skewed thing, but the impacts are quite significant. So what we really wanted to do was to understand why and how dogs prey on livestock. And we had a couple of things in mind. What we really wanted to know was, did higher population of dogs mean more depredation of livestock? Or was the depredation that was happening responded more to livestock? And what we also wanted to know was, what is the overall economic loss that we were looking at in the Upper Spiti landscape? So this included different methods of data collection. The village was a sample for us, so we sampled 25 villages. And in each village, we looked at each of these factors. So we looked at livestock that was killed by dogs, the total number of livestock that was present. We looked at garbage dumps We looked at the size of the villages. Dog abundance was calculated using photographic capture-recapture methods. And we also did structured interviews with local communities to understand what were the patterns of depredation. Now, through these interviews, we recorded 238 livestock mortalities across 287 sample size. And what we found was that dogs preferred small-bodied livestock as prey, but occasionally also targeted medium-bodied livestock like donkeys and zomos. What we also found was this seasonal pattern in how livestock was being killed in and around the villages and also across the different seasons. So we found that livestock depredation was the lowest during the summers, probably because the places had opened up for tourism and there was food that was available to them through the restaurants. Whereas as and when autumn season started coming in, a lot of the livestock were being left outside to for the manuring their fields, and as a result of which the livestock depredations increased. We also found that a lot of these depredations happened during the day, and despite herders being present, it really didn't help. So what we also found out that we had those two questions in mind. Did livestock depredation respond more to the presence of dogs, or did it respond more to the presence of livestock? And what we found was that more livestock and hence more depredation, and therefore this was the hypothesis, whatever that we had put out our predictions, that was supported. We also felt, we actually thought that the dogs would respond to the depredation would respond to more number of dogs, but what we also realized that only a subset of these dog populations were going and hunting and killing livestock as well, and not the entire population. In terms of economic losses, we recorded 441 cases, and about 77% of these depredations were caused by wild carnivores, and dogs were, of course, the maximum. But if you look at the economic differences of loss, it is almost similar to that of snow leopards. Overall, in a year, people lost close to livestock, which was 30 lakhs, and dogs contributed to almost 40% of the economic loss per household per year. Just something to take back from this part of the study, that dogs, livestock depredation, the key determinant is livestock abundance. We saw a seasonal trend in depredation, and they took place despite herders being present. The economic loss was much, much more as, in terms of the percentage, but monetarily it was almost comparable to snow leopards. And one thing that we need to remember is that when dogs are killing other people's livestock, there is no compensation that is available to these people, because it's a domestic animal and not a wild. So coming to a larger issue of tackling India's dog problem, a lot of things have changed in the last 2 to 3 decades. The vultures have declined. The niche, the scavenging niche has been taken over by dogs, and which has perhaps led to the increase in populations in India. In 2001, the animal birth control rules stated sterilization as the only means of controlling dog populations, and it didn't really go well with how things have changed over a period of time, with increasing number of conflicts with wildlife and humans, and therefore it is important that we start rethinking about our relationship with dogs itself. And if you look at the human-dog interface, it's rife with a lot of conundrums. And a recent paper by Lambertucci in 2023 actually puts out some of these challenges that are there when it comes to managing dog populations in India. And these are that there is not a clear legislation. There is the concept of dog ownership in India is extremely gray. There's a lot of intentional and unintentional food sources that becomes available to them, and limitation of shelters. And in general, if you look at how animal birth control is done for dogs in India, there's barely any accountability for them. And of course, at the end, we are also looking at power asymmetries in various stakeholders who are present over there. And therefore, what they had suggested was a marriage between strong institutions, legislations, consensus and scientific temper to start thinking about dogs and their impacts in a different way so that we can control their populations, but it's a wicked problem. And with that, I would like to end. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. This conference gave me this opportunity to present my work. And I would like to thank a lot of people over here, but these are all the people in field who made it possible. Thank you so much.